Hey everybody, today Rahdo runs through his top 10 expansions, which should be a fun, quick little list. I've done a run through for every single one of them, so I should be able to bang through this pretty quick. And before I get going, I should point out, these are just my personal favorites. This is not like some kind of objective list of the 10 greatest breakthroughs in board game expansion design. These are just the things that brought me the most joy, the most fun. It's not necessarily, interesting, when I started making this list, I first thought, well, I'm just going to make a list of every single expansion that is a must-have, that is a requirement, the kind of thing where, well, I will never play game X without expansion Y. I mean, and that just make it really easy. But the more I thought about it, I don't think that's necessarily the way to go. Particularly for games like living card games where, hey, the design of this game is every month you go out and you buy another expansion. Those things I kind of dismissed out of hand. And, something like Agricola, All Creatures Big and Small is a lovely little game, but what comes in the box is not enough to make it a viable game on its own. So you have to get those expansions to get what I would consider a complete game. So something like that, it's just too easy to say, oh, well, the game is incomplete without. I dismiss those as not valid, or at least that's not a valid enough reason to include it on the list. These 10 are the ones that will really just make me smile the most, that make me appreciate the core game. The core game itself is great. Every single one of these games I'm about to mention, the core game stands on its own, and it doesn't need an expansion at all. But every one of these expansion makes me appreciate the core game in new and interesting ways that really makes it blossom, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think I should just stop talking myself in circles and just start listing them now, right? Shall we? Okay, let's start then with number 10. Tuscany. This is actually an expansion to Viticulture. So I guess officially its name is, it's actually Tuscany, Expand the World of Viticulture is its name. And this is on the list for one very simple reason. Its cup runneth over. When you get this thing, you get so much stuff. How many modules do you get? You get structures, property, viticulture, arboriculture, which actually, to be fair, did come with the original if you had the... But anyway, the Mafia, Mamas and Papas, Advanced Visitors, Special Workers, Patronage, New Visitors, Formaggio, and Extended Board. That's like 3 or 4 expansions worth of content in one expansion. I would compare this to something like the expansions that have come out for Fresco, where, every time you get like 3 modules. This is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 modules. And so it's so amazingly overwhelming. The publisher, Stonemaier Games, they could have dribbed and drabbed this. They could have gotten, 3 or 4 times the amount of money by putting these out one after another, just little bits over the course of a couple of years. And I love the fact that they didn't. They just, boom, this is a heavy box. This adds so much to the core game that I had to include it. I'm not saying, it's interesting. Actually, none of these expansion elements are really all that brilliant. A lot of them are pretty, meat and potatoes, very straightforward, nothing really innovative, but this is a quantity nod. There's so much in this box. It adds so much and gives the core game so many legs. It's absolutely phenomenal. Now, there is the notion that this game is arguably, and actually I remind myself, it says on the box, this is a Legacy-style expansion pack. Not really. Although, to be fair, at the time when this came out, Legacy I don't think had been as firmly defined as what it means now. There's no destruction of objects in here, but there is kind of a metagame that is introduced where when you get this, you just start playing, and over time you unlock more and more and more of the expansion because there's so much stuff in here they could do that. I'm not saying that's the way to play. It's certainly not of any value to me and Jen. We just figure we just need some kind of randomizer. So every time we play, we just mix and match 2 or 3 new things. So every time you play, you get a different thing, and that's phenomenal. Normally, a game has to have 5 or 6 or 7 expansions before it has as much content as this one expansion did. And that's why Tuscany is at number 10. And now let's move on to number 9. Eminent Domain Escalation. This is a lovely little expansion. It made it on the list because, actually this is almost kind of counter to what I said right up front. This saves Eminent Domain for me and Jen. Now, and Eminent Domain is an amazing game. It's an absolutely phenomenal science fiction deck builder. It's one of the best deck builders on the market, and we absolutely love the core gameplay mechanisms. But the problem with the original Eminent Domain for us was, and it's not a problem for a lot of people, is the almost entire lack of startup variability. There's very, very little. Every time you play the game, you're always pretty much just going to be sitting down at the table to the same puzzle. And there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, for a lot of people, it works really great. But for me and Jen, it just kind of, it made it hard for us to really commit to Eminent Domain. Eminent Domain Escalation, though, it goes so above and beyond with its ability to add startup variability. I mean, yeah, they added a bunch of cards, but probably the thing I love more about this little expansion than anything else is these starting scenarios where when you start out, you get kind of like almost a customized thematic, this is my scenario. This defines everything about my starting deck, my starting resources, my starting everything. And it means every single player starts in a radically different situation. And I don't know of any other deck builders that do that. I mean, so the notion of not quite asymmetric, but almost asymmetry to player abilities in a deck builder is absolutely phenomenal, and that's what because also, and the thing is, I love it because it saved Eminent Domain for us. Eminent Domain was a brilliant game. It was a wonderful game, fully well fleshed out game. It just didn't work for us because of one problem. And this thing patched that hole. But like I said, it goes above and beyond and does it so much more than I ever thought it would. It's a brilliant little expansion. Number 9, Eminent Domain Escalation. Then moving on to number 8. Orleans Invasion. Now, this is interesting. This actually comes with several different modules, several different solo modes and whatnot. And almost probably 4/5 of the content of this expansion I could care less about, if I'm honest. I don't care about the solo missions. There's a little 2-player duel mission that's kind of nice, but I don't think, we played it once, I don't think we'd ever do it again. There's an alternate way to play the base game that I actively like less than the base game. And in fact, actually, to a certain extent, this was kind of a disappointing expansion at first glance, because the number one thing I wanted from Orleans was just more tiles. More building tiles with more variation, more variety. That's all I wanted out of this. And the amazing thing is, this game doesn't really have that. The game didn't even go down that road of giving us more tiles. There's a lot of tiles out there that are available via promos and whatnot if you go to certain conventions, and I wonder, why weren't they included in this expansion? But whatever. That's beside the point, because from the ashes of potential disappointment, I mean, a lot of the stuff in here wasn't a good fit for us, or we didn't really like all that much. It didn't really give us what we really wanted. But the Invasion module, which is what this is named after, is so incredibly amazing. So barnstormingly, bonkersly fresh and creative and original that it elevates the entire thing. Basically what this does, and again, I've done a run-through for this like all these, so you can go see the run-through to learn more. It turns the competitive, economic engine building resource management game of Orleans as a competitive Euro-style game and turns it into a co-op where players are still doing all their normal economic engine building style stuff, but cooperatively to try to complete a series of goals under extreme time pressures. Nobody else has done that. Pretty much every other co-op game out there is always all about fighting. Some external pressure that's appearing on, they all borrow, I'm not saying Pandemic created this, but they all borrow from Pandemic. They all take their, even when they're not, even when they're borrowing from Kenichia's Lord of the Rings, these things are always about, conflict, external conflict coming in, trying to destroy us. We have to work together to fight off the foreign invaders. And it's interesting, while this is actually called Invasion, the invasion doesn't really exist. There is no concept of invading marauders in this game. The invasion is titular at best. It's just a timer. You have X number of rounds before the invasion comes, and if you have not prepared for it, you lose. If you have prepared for it, you won. So really, it's just a countdown clock. It's not like we're constantly fighting fires all over the place. We are just working as best we can, as fast as we can, to complete a series of objectives. And brilliantly, each player, every time you play, everybody gets their own special character card, but not because that gives them special powers like what you normally expect, because it gives them special objectives, which means it changes up every single time you play as well. It's brilliant. I was gobsmacked just how ahead of the curve in terms of overall design this is, creating a completely new type of board game cooperative experience. It had to make it on the list, which is why it is number 8, Orleans Invasion. Now let's move on to number 7. Keyflower the Merchants. And actually, I thought quite long and hard about, I love Keyflower. I love Keyflower the Merchants. I love Keyflower the Farmers. They're two great expansions. And I thought, well, should I put Farmer on instead? Should I put Merchants on instead? And ultimately, what swung me over to Merchants was there's a bunch of stuff in both. But I think I like Merchants more because of the contract system that it introduces. It is one of the most deliciously painful decisions I can think of in modern board gaming. The notion that you get this contract, which if you take it, you know, okay, look, this gives me a goal I have to achieve by the end of the game. This is a really standard thing. I've got my own personal private objective. I want to make sure whatever I do along the way, I'm always aiming with this particular goal at the end in mind. But at any time during the game, if you're up against the wall, if you're desperate for something that you need right now, you can basically forfeit that contract and grab benefits that will put you over the top. It's the ultimate long-term strategy versus, short-term tactics, bird in the hand, two in the bush kind of thing, and it's brilliant. It is so wonderfully done. And that's not all. There's a lot of other really cool stuff in here. I love the fact that this introduces new ships, which is huge, particularly because Jen and I only play Keyflower 2-player, so we always end up playing with the exact same ships. Finally, we get to have new ships. That's such a big deal. There's a lot in here. And, on the whole, I think, the farmer stuff is great. And I bet you if you asked Jen if she thought about it, she'd probably take the farmer expansion over the merchant's expansion just because she loves animals. But in all honesty, the animals are a little bit fiddly and they kind of enhance maybe the most fiddly nature of Keyflower, which is kind of the weird, the way that tiles snap together. Don't get me wrong, it worked great, but it creates kind of just like a trickier overall simulation. This doesn't complicate the simulation. This just enhances the simulation. And again, those contracts are amazing. And that is why number 7 is Keyflower, the Merchants. Then moving on to number 6, Concordia Salsa, which is Concordia Salt. Now, Concordia is already an amazing game. And in fact, another expansion, Concordia Britannia, came out a year before this one. And I am forever thankful to Concordia Britannia, because Concordia itself is an absolutely amazing game. It was in my top 50 easily. But Jen, she did not really respond that well to Concordia the first couple times we played it. She thought it was too dry, not very evocative, and it's not. It's bone dry. And I was so happy when Concordia Britannia came out because just the change of the map to make it Britain was so evocative for Jen, because we've lived in England for years. Almost a decade. And we love it there, and Jen plans to go back there. So she was pulled in a way that the original Italian map never pulled her in. So Britannia kept Concordia on our shelves. Yay. That's great. But Concordia Salsa took it to another level with, I forget what they're called, but the law tiles, the tiles that give you a new reason to pass. In the base game, all the cards you get in your hand, and I'm not going to spend much time talking about how the game plays. I've done run-throughs for Concordia. I've done run-throughs for both of the expansions. But of all the stuff you can do in Concordia, the action of just recalling your cards is, kind of the least interesting one. And I love the fact that this expansion makes that suddenly just as deep and weighty and meaningful a decision of how long do I go before I recall my cards. Never mind the fact that every time you play, you're going to get such a wildly different combination of, I forget what they're called, contracts or whatever they are, the little tiles you can get, Senate tiles. They're amazing. This is an absolutely stellar expansion. Concordia itself is a beautiful work of art, of game design art, but this thing takes it to an 11 again. So I made my list. I love it. Concordia Salsa. Then on to number 5, right? Yep, number 5. And this is going to be the one that a lot of people, I think, disagree with, because I don't know why this expansion gets a lot of shade for some reason. And unfortunately, I don't have the box for it anymore. But I'm talking today about Stone Age, Style is the Goal. Or, as it's now called, Stone Age the Expansion, because apparently enough people complained about the original name of the expansion, Style is the Goal. I don't know. I liked it because it did what it said. Because it does signal a very, very important step in the societal evolution of mankind. On the whole, was it the Maslow's needs? Maslow's needs? Where at the beginning of the game, all you're worrying about is just, and in Stone Age, you're just worried about basic reproductive, issues making sure you don't starve to death, having a roof over your head. That's really all you're doing. And you maybe just, surviving enough to do a little bit of stuff. I mean, there's those statues you can get for the set collection and whatnot. But for the most part, you're really just basically scraping by. Style is the goal represented a major, major step in, again, the evolution of humanity. The fact that we became so successful as a species that we could stop worrying about those immediate low-level needs and instead start worrying about adorning ourselves with jewelry and whatnot. And that became such a huge, important element that I think it's a great, great subject matter for the expansion here. Now, again, I don't have the box, but I do actually, I pulled out the board before I filmed. This little board that you just slap over the top of your existing board is so lovely. It adds so much to the gameplay. And again, a lot of people aren't happy with it. A lot of people think that it makes the game a bit too easy, a bit too Monty Hall. But in all honesty, when people say that, I don't know what the heck it is they're playing. I think they fundamentally maybe kind of misunderstand the impact that, being able to get the jewelry, working your way up on, the different tracks that get added to the game. I mean, it really changes a lot. My only complaint about this, and I did complain about it quite a bit in my run-through, and I'm showing it again because it drives me so nuts. Why is the gatefold on this little mini expansion board like this? So you get this stupid white line right down the middle of Michael Menzel's beautiful, beautiful art. Drives me nuts. Why isn't the sticker on this side? Whatever. Still, regardless of that, Stone Age, Style is the Goal is a phenomenal expansion. And it is one that, more than anything else, I think makes our list because we like Stone Age, but Stone Age is way too light of a gateway game for me and Jen to keep playing. Stone Age, Style is the Goal basically ensured it goes above and beyond just regular gateway into something that has legs for me and Jen that we can continue to enjoy for years to come. Then, on to number 4. And this is a brand new one, I think. Yeah, or actually, no, there's one more coming. Actually, yeah, there's 3. 3 of them that came out in 2015 with Orleans Invasion and this one and one that is yet to come. What am I talking about? What is number 4? Russian railroads, German railroads. Arguably the silliest expansion title, or actually German railroads, it's an extension to Russian railroads, but officially this is Russian railroads : German railroads, which is quite silly. But this is amazing. This is such an incredibly wonderful expansion. Now I know for a lot of people they would put this on this list because there's this common wisdom that Russian railroads maybe has a shelf life, that you play it too many times and it gets a bit too rote. Jen and I, we haven't found that to be the case. Maybe that's because we only play it 2-player, but we've always found that there's enough variety based on what engineers come out in the early game. That is going to push the game in a different direction every time. So even if you're going to do largely the same basic actions of trying to expand railroad line 1, 2, or 3, it's all about trying to figure out the best way to do that based on the engineers that come out. So the base game for us always had legs. But man, the designers, Helmut Ulrey and Leonard Orgler, they must have really taken people's complaints to heart because this thing, again, like earlier, takes it to an 11. They create so much replay variability in this game now because, well, of course it adds more engineers, so there's even more replay value based on the engineers that come out when you play. They add a whole new resource of coal, which is a big game changer. It can make a really big deal. Although I love, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It depends, again, on what engineers come out, which means more variation. But the thing I really love about this, and again, you can see my run-through that I did of this expansion to see it actually in action, this allows you to customize your player board. So every time you play, you start out with the same board that shows 3 rail lines you're going to be able to expand. But there are all these extra tiles that you can add to your board that fundamentally change the rail lines you're going to create for yourself. But then you set goals for yourself of how you're going to create these rail lines by customizing your own railroads, and then you still have to hit those goals based on what engineers you can get and using all the resources. It's brilliant. The core game itself was so amazing, and this is such an amazing expansion. It was a really easy one. I knew this was going to come out very, very high on my list. The first time I ever played it. Amazing. Number 4, Russian railroads, German railroads. And then on to number 3. This one kind of surprised me. That's kind of, I really thought long and hard about these expansions, and when I first thought about number 3, I'm like, but it's nice, but it's not that big a deal. But then the more I thought about it, and the more I thought about what it does, I just kept coming back to it. And when it started out, I'm like number 10, but then, no, it's actually, I appreciate what it does that more than this. Is it number 9? Number 6? Number 5? Is this number 4? Number 3, yes it is. I appreciate this. What this does, the more I thought about it, the more I absolutely love Fleet Arctic Bounty. Now, don't get me wrong. Fleet, if this didn't exist, Fleet is still a keeper. Right up there on the wall. I absolutely love it. It is a phenomenal engine building auction game. Very, very atmospheric, very thematic, really, really great. Didn't need this expansion at all. Never once for a second thought it needed an expansion. But this expansion is so great, because it does a few different things. One, it adds so much more variability, so much more variety, because there are now so many fishing licenses. Every time you play, you're going to get a different combination of fishing licenses. It's really going to change the game up. In much the same way that every time you play a new game of Dominion, you're going to get a different combination of stuff. I love that. It works so well here. But that's not what put it on the list. What put it on the list is the new 2-player variant it does for auctions. The game was already, at its heart, an auction game, and a very good one, and a game that worked really, really well for 2-player auctions, something that a lot of auction games fail at. So it didn't have to improve it, but the way it introduced a new way that you can do auctions in a 2-player game is so wonderfully done. I can only hope it's something that all game designers who are making a game featuring auctions copy in the future, because it's so brilliant. The way they introduced was Captain Kirkman, and basically they named after real people. That when you're playing a 2-player game, there is a third auctioneer that is run by a very, very simple probability system, so you can kind of guess what you think the third player, the dummy player in this auction is going to do, but just like a real human being, you can't be 100% certain. Sometimes they'll surprise you, sometimes they'll do what you expect them to do. It works brilliantly. It makes what were already really phenomenal, tense, tight, exciting auctions, even in 2-player, amazing. As good as auctions you would get with more players, and that's why I admire this thing so much. Absolutely amazing. Like I said, I hope everybody who designs auction games studies this and copies it, because it's so great. And that's number 3, Fleet Arctic Bounties. Now, on to number 2, Agricola, Farmers of the Moor. And, this is an interesting one, too. I went back and forth on this quite a bit. Because I'll be honest, Agricola, Farmers of the Moor is not my favorite Agricola expansion. In all honesty, I'd have to kind of give it to the Gamer Deck, because I'm absolutely in love. The Gamer Deck expansion for Agricola adds so much stuff. There's so much creativity and vitality, and adds so many new and interesting ways to experience and explore and think about the core mechanisms of Agricola. It's a brilliant little expansion, and it's extra brilliant because it wasn't designed by professional game developers. It wasn't designed by Uwe Rosenberg, the original designer of Agricola. It was designed by fans, die-hard Uber fans who worked together in this big gestalt and came together with an amazing thing. So why did Farmers of the Moor make it and not Gamer Deck? Well, because at the end of the day, while Gamer Deck is amazing, and it adds a lot of new stuff, it doesn't fundamentally change anything about the core game. And I'll be honest, I love it when an expansion doesn't just, hey, here's just more of the same. Here's more of what you like. That's another reason something like Dominion didn't make the list. Dominion, even though a lot of the expansions do a lot of really interesting things within the confines of the Dominion system, none of them fundamentally change the Dominion system or add to it or expand it or alter it. And the same thing is true for Agricola Gamers Deck. I think for every single one of these things I did, that not only do they just expand what was already there, but they add new, fundamentally different systems. And to me, that's kind of crucial to making a really top-notch, stellar expansion. The one that really captures my imagination. And Farmers of the Moor does that better than almost anything, because it adds so much stuff in there with the peat and the clearing out of the fields, the having to heat your houses. Of course, a whole raft of new and exciting and interesting cards as well. But in addition to adding fundamental new game changes that not only enhance the game but expand the game, there's another thing that this does that the gaming deck doesn't do, which is to put this on the top. It kind of plugs a hole. It fixes maybe something that is less than ideal about the original Agricola, and I've talked about this in the run through, but it has to do with the way heating works, the way that heating makes upgrading your house early in the game much more viable, because that's something that in a regular Agricola, it's very rare that you'll get a situation where you don't always build to as many wood house rooms as you're going to make and then just upgrade, boom, boom, quickly at the end of the game. I love the fact that heating makes early upgrading a much more viable path to victory. It's a fundamental game changer, even though it sounds like a simple little thing, but there are so many fundamental game changers in this box. I had to go with Agricola. Farmers of the Moor is my number 2. And now here we go, folks, number 1. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you haven't already cheated and looked down in the show notes and read, and you're about to see it, swallow whatever liquid you're drinking right now, because I guarantee you're going to do a spit take. If you don't know what's coming, you're going to curse my name. You are going to flip me off. You are going to say, that is ridiculous, Richard Ham. That is ridiculous, Rahdo. That is not an expansion at all. That doesn't belong on the list, but I don't care because I'm putting it on my list as my number 1. Pandemic Legacy. Yes, folks, Pandemic Legacy. I consider Pandemic Legacy to be an expansion to Pandemic. And I know officially it's not, but everything about this game is an expansion. Quite frankly, Z-Man, if they wanted to, they could have released this as an expansion. You didn't need to have a new copy of the Pandemic board. There's nothing that really fundamentally changes about the Pandemic board. And obviously, this is a tough one for me to talk about because I can't really make my argument too terribly well without going into spoiler territory, and I'm not going to spoil anything about this. Suffice to say that much like Pandemic on the Brink, or Pandemic State of Emergency, or Pandemic in the Lab, this game adds a bunch of new functionality and layers and lets you layer it into the core Pandemic experience. So much so that like I said, you could treat this, you could have thrown away the board that came with this and just only kept the expansion content, the stuff that came in the little boxes that wasn't part of the core game, and just put it on your original Pandemic board. Strictly speaking, officially, it is a standalone game, but functionally, as far as I'm concerned, is an expansion. It is an expansion that adds several new gameplay features, which I will not talk about, but that are eye-opening and jaw-dropping. It is an expansion that basically includes a campaign that introduces, instead of, say, Orleans, or no, instead of, which one? Key Flower Merchants has several different things. You could turn on X, Y, Z. Same thing for Tuscany. Tuscany is a good example. You could turn on, I could do this one and this one and this one, or I could do this one and this one, or I could do this one and this one, or I could do them all if I wanted. You have all these different things. There's all these different elements, all these different modules that can be turned on. Pandemic Legacy doesn't just give you the list. It creates a story that introduces all these things to you, these new things. And again, I'm not going to say what they are, but over the course of the game, as you play through the campaign of this game and you're introduced to more and more and more what I consider to be expansion content for Pandemic, the game gets deeper and richer. And of course, the key thing that drives this expansion of Pandemic, the Pandemic experience, is the fact that there's permanence. That once you introduce these new things to Pandemic, they are, in many cases, permanent additions that forever change Pandemic. That is what makes Legacy so amazing. The fact that when I finish one game of Pandemic Legacy, the impact of how we succeeded, how we failed, our choices will live on. There is a legacy to every game we play. And we absolutely love that. And the thing is, now that we have finished Pandemic Legacy, it's interesting, this is now my copy of Pandemic. My old copy of Pandemic from my original first print from 2007 that I've got, it's now buried deep in a cupboard somewhere. I don't even know if I'm ever going to get out again. I'm thinking about maybe selling it because this continues to be, this is basically, what you get in this box is Pandemic, a base copy of vanilla Pandemic, as if you just went out and bought Pandemic, and then a whole bunch of expansion content that comes in the game, and it's introduced to you through a story-driven campaign. That is why I consider this, because the vanilla part of Pandemic has replaced my old copy of Pandemic. That's why this is an expansion as far as I'm concerned, and the best expansion ever, because the key component, while this expansion introduced variability, this expansion changed the way you do auctions, this expansion just introduced a lot of variety of different things, this expansion introduced brilliant starting scenarios, this expansion added a new way to experience co-ops and Euros, something you haven't seen before. This expansion just added legacy to Pandemic. No different than any of these other expansions that just added some new core game-changing feature to a base game. That's what this is. That is why this is my #1 expansion of all time. Agree to disagree, folks? I know a lot of you do, because I've mentioned this in the past, and people are like, "Rah, I am up in arms. I refuse to accept." But it's the way I feel. Like I said, I don't have regular Pandemic. I use the contents of this to play on the brink and in the lab. I mix and match the expansion content of my Pandemic Legacy with the expansion content from my other games. This game is not a once and forget, play it and toss it. Everybody says it is. This has just as much legs, and the legacy elements have added more cool, fun, new, exciting gameplay mechanisms to the core Pandemic experience, no different than any of these other expansions. This expanded the Pandemic experience, and that's why it's my #1 expansion, because it did it better than any other one of these expansions I've talked about. And that's it, folks. There's my top 10. Crazy, right? Well, what can I say? That's it, folks. Thanks for watching. Questions, comments, concerns, as always, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a very, very nice day. Talk to you later. So long. Bye-bye.